All right, my third PYOA, of course I did birds again. Got a PowerPoint, sorry my cat is being really annoying. Got a PowerPoint on the effects that birds incur from the coastal habitat loss in Louisiana. And on this cover slide, I just have a picture of some sanderlings and a beautiful Grand Isle sunset that I took not too long ago. So obviously we all know that coastal erosion is a huge issue for the last, oh gosh, 50, 60 years in Louisiana wildlife management. Louisiana actually represents 80% of the U.S.'s annual coastal wetland loss, which is insane considering the small amount of coastline we have compared to other states like Maine or Florida or California. And that's according to the Sea Grant study from Louisiana this year. And that we actually lose about 6,500 hectares of coastal wetland per year in Louisiana from another study, which is, again, is a ridiculous amount of good bird habitat. So the biggest thing with Louisiana, one of the biggest things with Louisiana's birds is we are the prime stopover for what are called trans-Gulf migrants. So trans-Gulf migrants differ from circum-Gulf migrants, which you'll see in yellow. Oh, I have a laser pointer. In yellow, right here. So circum-Gulf obviously means going around the Gulf. Trans-Gulf is a lot more energy intensive, where you're jumping from the Yucatan Peninsula right here. And you're landing, it says Texas, and there's definitely a lot of birds in Texas, but there's also a lot of birds that stop over in sites like Grand Isle or in Cameron Parish or anywhere in coastal Louisiana is super important. Sorry, I had to let my cat out. He's been freaking annoying. Super important for trans-Gulf migrants. And this is only in the spring. You don't really see a lot of trans-Gulf migration in the fall for whatever reason. We're not really sure. You don't see a ton of it in the fall. And just a couple pointers here. We got a 600-mile nonstop flight from Grand Isle to the Yucatan Peninsula, which is insane when you consider that a lot of these birds that are doing these migrations are small stuff like this little indigo bunting. And I mean, even when I was growing up, and they're still pretty common, indigo buntings are pretty abundant. But I mean, you go back 50 years ago and they were absurdly abundant. And using some of the new data from eBird, which is public science, so take it as you will, but these are hand selected by the good people at Cornell Labs. This is from 2007 to 2021, the breeding season. Red is decline, darker red, bigger decline, so a lot in the Mississippi River Valley right here, which is the prime of their breeding range. Blue is increase, and it's hard to see on this picture because it's kind of small. There is no blue on this map, and that is a common trend for a lot of these birds that we'll be talking about that use Louisiana either in the as a stopover site for migration, or a breeding site in the summer, or a wintering site, which is a lot of birds. Here's another example of a trans-Gulf migrant, and this one's kind of weird because it is both a trans and a circum-Gulf migrant, but we do have a lot of them as trans-Gulf migrant. This is a rose-breasted grosbeak, pretty closely related to cardinals. Cardinalidae is the family. This is also on Grand Isle, like that indigo bunting was. And it is eating some mulberries, which are super calorie dense, really high in sugars. They don't taste very good to me, but the birds tear them up down in Grand Isle in the spring. And this is obviously a male because he's pretty. And so here's one of the only birds with any blue on the map as far as population growth. And the red, now this really interested me because for a lot of these birds that are more central northern based, you'll actually see a lot of blue on these northern edge of their maps, and for what I think is like warming summers and maybe even warming winters that allow them to have a higher fecundity rate. But you get a lot of growth, population growth down here, and I talked with some professors about this, and we don't really know what's going on there, but it's good to see. It's one of the only ones that is increasing in population, unfortunately, in this presentation. And then Tennessee warbler, horribly named bird because they spend maybe 3 weeks a year in Tennessee during fall and spring migration. But John James Audubon shot the first one in Tennessee, so therefore it was named Tennessee warbler. Obviously, this one also eating some more mulberries, probably actually picking bugs out from under the leaves of the mulberries. And another trans-Gulf migrants. Now this one is really cool. This map. This is the only map I could find with the fall or the wintering ground trend data, and I mean it's just solid red from 2017 to 2021, or 2007 to 2021, so 14 years of publicly funded data or publicly supported data. And this is wintering ground, so you're going to have a larger amount of birds because it's the winter. So pretty poor. And again, this is the first, Louisiana is going to be the first spot of land that these birds are seeing after a 600-mile nonstop flight. And this bird is the size that could fit in the palm of your hand, weighs maybe 10 grams tops. And then for wintering shorebirds, which are the most threatened group of birds in North America, all 51 species of North American shorebirds are experiencing declining populations, and you should like these ones, Dr. England, because they do breed in the prairie potholes for the most part, and then a lot of them also breed north of the Arctic Circle. And they do spend the majority of their year in their wintering habitat. So Louisiana, Gulf Coast, Atlantic Coast for the most part, but a lot on the Gulf Coast. First example here, we've got a western sandpiper, and this is a hatchier bird. You can tell by the amount of rufous in the coverts right here, and then the nice rufous markings. This is I believe, an Arctic Circle breeding bird. Uses Louisiana mostly as a stopover site, but we do actually have a pretty decent wintering number here compared to other coastal states where they can be a little bit pretty rare in the winter, I would say. And I didn't get, eBird does not have maps for all of these, so Western Sandpiper did not have a map, but obviously they're declining. Marbled Godwit, right here, this is one of our largest wintering shorebirds, I think our second largest wintering shorebird. Prairie potholes breeder, so North Dakota born and bred, probably, maybe Saskatchewan, I don't know, I didn't ask this one. Another one that has been experiencing huge population declines basically since the West was settled, because they were a valuable food source for a while. Then they turned to habitat loss, which is going to be the main killer on all of these actually. And my personal favorite shorebird, and this is a long-billed curlew. This is in Utah, so this is a little bit cheating because they do not breed anywhere close to Louisiana. But this is a long-billed curlew mama with a baby. This is probably our heaviest declining shorebird in North America in terms of population. Louisiana barely has these anymore. Really anywhere in the American South barely has these anymore. And South Carolina, they are, for all effective purposes, extinct as far as a wintering species. And here's our population trends. Prairie potholes up here, eastern Washington, and then the Great Plains region. And actually did not realize that they bred in Texas, which is really, really cool. And these look like long-staying birds. These would not be breeding down here. But again, it's kind of interesting to see this blue. Is that from actually increasing, or is that from better habitat that these birds are jumping into, and this is now acting as a population sink? I don't know. This data doesn't really tell us, but it's a really good starting point for future research projects. But I think long-billed curlew actually has a good bit of research going on with it as far as population trends. This is another classic one. This is the piping plover. This is one of the few shorebirds that is actually, or was federally listed. I think it's now vulnerable, but it was endangered. This is again cheating because this wasn't in Louisiana, but this is in South Carolina where I grew up. This bird right here, color banded. I think yellow and blue means it came from the North Dakota population. I think all the birds, the right leg on piping plovers, the color band pattern determines what state they were banded in. Excuse me. This is another super heavily declining one, but not because of wintering habitat, but because of breeding habitat. But these are unique because they do kind of tend to forage more up in the littoral zone where there's not a lot of disturbance compared to like the tidal zone. And then they got those nice sandy backs that perfectly blend in with the sand. Makes them really hard to see from a distance. Kind of have to get up on them and flush them. But another super heavily declining one, I think there's, of the Great Lakes population, there's less than 500 or 600 still breeding out there today, but I have to double check on that. Here's their trend map. We have no data for most of the country, slight increases in Great Lakes, but this is extremely heavy management. I think each and every bird that breeds up here is color banded at least, but I think there's a lot of GPS telemetry stuff that goes on up here. Again, this is super heavy management up in North Dakota, and then declines. Shocker! And where the oil is drilled in Saskatchewan, or just south of where oil comes out of in Saskatchewan, and then declining population on the Atlantic coast in the winter. Although this is June, so this is long-staying birds that overstayed their welcome, and then obviously they don't breed down here, so we don't have any data, but big time decline in this guy, unfortunately. And then, this is one of my favorite pictures. This is a Sora rail, and this is how we catch rails out in the rice countries when we're out trying to ban yellow rails. We get a lot of Sora as bycatch because it is fairly common. Kind of cheating to call this a shorebird, but it is close enough genetically, so it made this part of the PowerPoint. Not a lot of big breeding numbers in the south. The furthest south I can think of that they breed is maybe, I'm so sorry about my cat, he really needs attention. Furthest south I think they breed is maybe Arkansas, but another hugely declining bird is we see a lot of wetland drainage, that they're pretty much exclusive to wetlands as far as breeding. Massive population declines in the heart of their breeding range, which would be prairie pothole region of central Canada and North Dakota, down into Wisconsin and Minnesota right over there. And super valuable on and near the coast, as they kind of winter more in like cattails, freshwater, brackish marshes. You don't really see them on the beaches at all. That would be a bad sign. But again, super heavy declines on all of these. And then lastly, we got our breeding birds. So we don't have a ton of breeding marsh birds compared to a lot of parts of the country. But sea level rise does continue to threaten our breeding marsh birds, especially species that nest in salt marshes, and then also the species that nest on the beach. Obviously, we lose more beaches. Habitat loss, fragmentation, degradation. One thing I didn't put in here is disturbance, and I'll kind of talk on that in a minute, because there's a ton of disturbance that goes into this stuff. But some of our really cool breeding coastal birds include mottled duck. This is probably your favorite picture of the whole PowerPoint. This is from the Gulf Coast population. This is a breeding male, breeding female in Grand Isle. One of the couple dozen pairs down there. Really a Gulf Coast exclusive species. Furthest north they really get is South Carolina. And we got our two subspecies. We've got Fulvigula and Maculosa. Fulvigula being the Florida birds, Maculosa being kind of Gulf Coast, Texas, Louisiana birds. Huge declines. Really excited to join the study looking at why they're declining in nest predation. And hopefully I can find out more, because I don't really think anybody knows why they're declining. But I mean, massive declines. Whereas, a lot of the Ducks Unlimited people will probably tell you that they're on the increase, and whether or not that is a discrepancy in how sampling is done between these two studies, I think would be super interesting to look at. Probably my favorite bird of this whole presentation, black rail lateralis jamaicensis. This is one of our two, I believe, breeding federally listed endangered birds, the eastern black rail. This was one that I actually caught, very proud to say that, in a butterfly net in the marsh in hip deep cattail, or hip deep juncus. Federally endangered now. This was before it was listed, like a month before it got listed. We don't know anything about these birds hardly, even though it breeds 2 hours away from LSU. We don't know anything about these birds pretty much. There's one study going on right now that I'm aware of. And it's going to be eBird map because they are so undescribed. But sea level rise is affecting them, and these guys too. The clapper rails, because the rising tides in the marshes and the increased amount of flooding events actually floods their nests out. And like I said, this is a clapper rail. These guys are super common still, but they are in super, I mean, free fall population declines in a lot of the country and a lot of the world because they have quite a few subspecies. This is a female sitting on a nest. This is also cheating. This was in South Carolina, but you know, they breed here close enough. And here's our eBird trend map. They're actually, I was surprised to see this. They are increasing on the Atlantic coast, but then you got these Gulf Coast birds just in free fall. Again, minus 30% over a 14-year period, which is absurd to me because they're crazy common. But I mean, if that's what the data says, that's what the data says, and I would attribute that mostly to fragmentation as we kind of divide up marshes into various properties, and sea level rise flooding out the marshes and the eggs that they need. This is one of my favorite birds growing up because this is one of the first projects I worked on. This is the seaside sparrow. This is, I believe, endemic to the United States. I don't think they breed anywhere outside the United States. Super susceptible to sea level rise because, again, they nest in the salt marshes and they need those Spartina grasses to build their nests. But if the water gets to a certain height, then they have total nest failure as the eggs flood out and drown. And this little guy is being fitted with a geolocator that we learned about in class. Yay, recapture. And here's their eBird trend map. So Gulf Coast, huge decline. Atlantic Coast, not so bad. And there's actually a subspecies in Florida that went entirely extinct, the dusky seaside sparrow that I think went extinct in 1986 or whenever, due to habitat loss. Thanks, Disney. Here's another, what I consider iconic, breeding bird of the Louisiana coastline. This is a reddish egret, kind of hanging out with some black skimmers and some laughing gulls. Another banded bird. Super heavy decline, not so much because of habitat loss. A long time ago it was because of the hunting for plumes, but thankfully that ended with Migratory Bird Treaty Act. These birds are actually largely in decline, what we think is because of disturbance, and that also here's your population map. Free fall everywhere. Also ties in with these guys, black skimmers, super prone to disturbance. If they basically see people on their breeding island once more than a couple times a year, they will abandon the whole island. And they are colony nesters. That abandonment of the island will lead to a total breeding failure for an entire state's population. These will likely be listed as threatened or endangered in the near future. And again, because stuff like this, where Louisiana, where historically black skimmer has been a stronghold species in Louisiana, and in Florida, free fall population. And a common theme that I do want to tie in here is that every single bird that I've looked at in the status and trends that eBird just put out a couple weeks ago, pretty much everyone from cardinals to mockingbirds to game species is in a free fall in Louisiana, and we have no clue why other than habitat fragmentation and loss. And then another one, prone to disturbance, royal terns. Most of these beach birds hate human disturbance. They can't put up with it. They freak out and they just won't breed. It's better for them to fail at breeding than to die trying to protect the nest energetically. And here's a nice royal tern with a mackerel. I don't know, it's a fish, it doesn't count. And again, population declines throughout the range. Everywhere it's declining or no trend, which means probably declining because they just don't breed there. And state bird brown pelican. This one wasn't an increase for a short period. And again, got a total population decline. California subspecies down to the Gulf of California, Gulf Coast, and no change in data for the Carolinas. But again, we have such small breeding numbers up on this kind of mid-Atlantic coastline outside of Florida on the Atlantic. They're not big breeders. It's a lot of dispersal. But I mean, population declines. No reason other than fragmentation and disturbance that we can know. And I think this is our last one. Sorry, I know this is kind of going really long. Got a Wilson's plover here. This is not endangered. I think it's near threatened or threatened. Another one of our few breeding shorebirds, if not our only breeding shorebird besides killdeer, which doesn't count because it's garbage, in Louisiana. Banded adult female. Another one that is in big population declines because of human disturbance and habitat loss with rising sea level, encroachment from private development. And here's their population map. Good to see it's increasing somewhere. But again, Gulf Coast population is just not doing well. And I can attest to that because I can remember when they were a lot more common 6 or 7 years ago down here. So what can we do? You want to keep your dogs leashed on the beach. because flying is calorically expensive, like we talked about in class, and eating worms all day is calorically inefficient. And that's actually backed up by a 1986 paper talking about how dogs on beaches lead to decreased bird survival. You can volunteer with CPRA or look for a job. Some of us might be graduating soon. CPRA has their restoration efforts with the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers. This is their goals for the Southwest parishes on beach extension, I think, and beach protection. The paper was a little bit above my head. And then the best one, I think, for all of us to do, Delta Audubon has their coastal stewardship program. It's super easy to get involved with. I'm really good friends with the woman that runs it. She's awesome. She's always looking for more stewards, and it's awesome. Monitoring populations, and that's where a lot of this data comes from, is from the Delta Audubon submitting their eBird checklists consistently and monitoring populations. And I think I just got my work cited, and I'm sorry that was really long, but I hope you enjoyed it, Dr. Engelman. Thank you.